Hi, folks. Steve Urban here, founder and CEO at recruiting firm Riderflex. If you enjoyed today's guest interview, please give it a like and be sure to subscribe to the Riderflex podcast. And now, a quick word from our sponsor.
Try the #1 marketing platform for small business. Everything you need from design to marketing to CRM. Learn more at marketing360.com. Marketing 360. Fuel your brand. Try the #1 marketing platform for small business. Everything you need from design to marketing to CRM. Learn more at marketing360.com. Marketing 360. Fuel your brand.
Keith Glendon on the Riderflex podcast. Hi, Keith. How are you?
Hey, good, Steve. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I love your studio, your setup. It looks professional. I like it.
Yeah, it is. I'm very fortunate to be sitting in a studio that's sitting in a facility in Marquette, Michigan, that is a co-working community that I inadvertently became the founder of in 2020, and have recently passed that mantle on to my co-founders, but still a founding member. And one of the perks is I get to come in and use the studio. So
Nice.
really fabulous.
Yeah, the lighting's good. The sound is good. I wish all of our guests had that set up so often. You know, the lighting is one thing, right? I think listeners, especially when they're driving and listening and they're not watching the YouTube channel, they don't mind if the lighting sucks, but the audio is critical, right? And so
Yeah.
appreciate you.
We have the fortunate experience of having gone through in 2020, when shortly after launching a co-working space, the entire state went into lockdown.
Right.
We found ourselves in this strange situation of trying to figure out what on earth to do. So we experimented with a lot of things, including our own podcast series. We started doing some fireside chats, we called them, and we were engaging local innovators and entrepreneurs at the local level. Of course, the World Wide Web is global, but we were focused on trying to just promote locally while the doors were closed, thinking it was going to be temporary. Wound up, of course, being nearly 2 years. But that taught us a lot about, because none of us were audio engineers or videographers, and so it was only through some pretty interesting experiments, including one where we got Zoom bombed by hackers who waved Nazi flags around and came in playing strange music and saying insulting things. And so we learned the hard way about how to make sure you had your security together and how you made sure that you had good audio and you had good production control if you were going live, because a lot of our events that we did were live events. So,
I see.
We were experimenting with direct, fully authentic direct to viewer.
That's interesting that I didn't know that was even possible. I didn't know people could jump into your meetings and do stuff like that.
They can get a hold of, if you publicize the code. The failure that we had done was in our registration process, we had inadvertently had a setting wrong, and so the code was published on the public internet.
I see.
And that got picked up somewhere. So yeah.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate the setup though. It looks really good. By the way, is the podcast still happening? Do you want to mention that at all, or direct people?
It has kind of morphed, because since that time we've actually launched Upper Michigan's only chapter of Startup Grind. So Startup Grind X Marquette is now our chapter here, and we now have taken that format of podcasts. It's not so much podcasting anymore as doing fireside chats in the Startup Grind environment, and so we're still doing them. In fact, next week, on the 21st, we've got Rich Sheridan, who is the CEO of Menlo Enterprises and the author of Joy Incorporated and a couple of other Chief Joy Officer. He's a really fantastic guy, and Startup Grind is a really wonderful network, which is why we joined it. It's a founder-led, in many ways, a founder-led network of innovators and entrepreneurs around the world, who are supporting one another in a global community.
Nice.
So yeah, it's still running. If you look up Startup Grind Marquette, or just check out Startup Grind, and you'll see it there. And I think probably on the Campfire Coworks website as well.
Okay, very good. Appreciate you sharing that. Before we get into your career and LucidCoast, Well, tell me about Keith, the person, family, mom, dad, siblings, where you grew up. Give me some early stuff if you don't mind.
Yeah, you might have to keep a rein on me, because you open up a question like that, it could go all over the place. But let's start with the basics. The basics where I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is in Lower Michigan. And I was imported to Upper Peninsula of Michigan when I was probably like a year old.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I consider myself a Youper. There are dyed-in-the-wool Youpers who would not agree with that, but more and more the UP, as it is called, and the Youpers are people who inhabit the UP. If you haven't heard of that term,
Okay.
Traditionally, the UP was a culturally very separate to the Lower Peninsula, and it was populated by, first and foremost, it was originally populated by Native Americans, the Ojibwa, and the Chippewa, and the Anishinaabe people. And of course, when it was settled by Europeans here in this region, it was largely Finnish, and a lot of miners came to this region. And this area is very much like the geography of Finland, and I think that probably has to do with the ethos of this region.
Okay.
Anyway, that's probably more backdrop than you want, but I tend to do that. So I grew up here, the child of a carpenter and a teacher.
All right.
I spent most of my life here. Marquette, Michigan, back in the 70s, 80s was still pretty remote, and it was a very small town, and our industry was mining, forestry, a lot of construction, that sort of thing. And we didn't have an awful lot when it came to the kinds of culture that you see in small town America today, certainly in Marquette. But it was a great place to grow up, because I grew up fishing and hunting, and the biggest excitement I had was the local roller rink. And so I was kind of a roller skating rink rat growing up, and didn't have siblings.
Is that why you're a ref or something with roller derby now? I saw something.
Yeah. So that convergence came later, but exactly. I became an official, a referee in roller derby, which I've hung up that career for now. Anyway, I got too busy to be a ref anymore. So that was the backdrop, and then I was a kid that never really quite fit into school, and part of that had to do with probably my neurotype and some of the things that were going on in my life, but also part of it, I now understand, and looking back, is really connected to a realization that I was having even as a young child, about the misalignment between what I felt inside and what I wanted to be and what I thought life was about, and the entire thing that they were asking me to do, the system as it were.
Yeah.
And
did you have siblings? Did you have siblings or no?
I had a sibling, but she came along when I was 19, and she was my half sister. Unfortunately, she passed in 2020. Okay. So yeah, I was raised without siblings. I enjoyed having a sibling for 28 years, and I am once again without siblings.
Was your dad a carpenter, an entrepreneur, or did he work for somebody?
He was an entrepreneur. He eventually wound up going and working for somebody. And I think when he first came up here, I think he was making a go of it. That was his entrepreneurial debut. So it's kind of appropriate that I'm back here making my entrepreneurial debut in the same town, 40 years later. And so, yeah, he was a builder. He did eventually, it was a tough time to be a solo construction worker right back then. And it always is, I suppose. So over the course of time, he did go to work for larger companies, and he later in his career was a superintendent. He built military barracks and hospitals and schools, and actually wound up his career started here as an entrepreneur builder, and his career ended in the Upper Peninsula building schools. So it's kind of poetic.
Are they still alive? Are they still around?
Still alive, still around. Dad is in Florida right now. Mom and her husband live here in Marquette, always have. My mom was a teacher for 38 years.
Were they divorced when you were young, or they divorced after you grew up?
Yeah, I was younger. I think I was maybe 7 when they divorced. And so a lot of my formative years were in the context of being raised by a single public school teacher in pretty meager providing. I mean, it wasn't, we had everything we needed, but it was a class experience that was, it was a struggle at times.
Were
and
you a
so
good kid? Were you a good kid or were rebel?
No, I wasn't a good kid. I was a good kid. I was a good kid. I didn't follow the rules. I was a good kid. I was just not good at following the rules.
Oh,
I
see.
questioned things. I was a spirited kid. I was, they couldn't tell if I had a disorder or a gift, and I still am not sure. I'm still not sure about
What's
that.
the biggest trouble you ever got in? Did you get arrested? Have you been arrested? Anything?
I have been arrested. Yes, I have. I've been arrested in my days, and I've been
arrested as in plural.
Plural. Yep. And I don't say that with pride. I say that with simply experience and honesty. I've had some run-ins with the law in my life, and those are all well behind me now. And part of the reason that I don't drink is because of that. But and that's just these are all things that they're part of my story. They're part of my story.
Is that tough, by the way, when you're at a social event and everybody's got a cocktail and you can't grab one? Is that hard?
Not at all. Not anymore. It was when I decided to stop drinking, but not anymore. Not even a little. I'm not even tempted. I consider myself blessed at this point to not be burdened with that social expectation. So
what about cannabis? What about other recreational stuff? Anything?
I've gone off and on with cannabis in my life and with other recreational things in my life. At this point, I prefer to be as present as possible, and I prefer to focus on the things that are meaningful in my life that are going to last.
How do you relax? How do you
I don't know right now. So my current context is, I don't know if we would call it relaxing, but I get a little bit of time to myself in the morning between 4:45 and 6.
Right.
Somewhere between 4:45 and 6. There is the quiet time in the house where none of my 4 kids are awake, and my devices aren't yet going off really, and I can read a book or I could just sip a coffee and look out the window or go for a walk. So it's really about maximizing those moments. And I'll be honest. I mean, it's very hard to relax right now.
Well,
I'm an entrepreneur with children ranging from 4 to 21, and they all live at home. And we've just come through a pandemic that's still happening, but we're going to pretend that it's not. And World War III is trying to start, and I've got 3 or 4 businesses I'm trying to run. So I don't really, if I don't just make little spaces to relax throughout the day, even before we got on here, just sitting in here and taking 2 minutes to meditate into a setting of calm, right? It's
4 to 21, all at home. So you're married, and all 4 children from the same wife?
No, I've been married 3 times. This is the 3rd time is a charm. This is a good way to go. You say, but actually this is a really good way to have a solid marriage. Get married 3 times. Because you get 2 tries to figure out all the things that are wrong with you that you need to work on as you bring it into the 3rd marriage, when you're hopefully mature enough to realize that it's never about the other person. It's really about you.
And the 4 children, are they all from your marriages or any from hers?
So our eldest comes from my wife's first marriage. He's 21, and I consider him my son. Okay. His dad has been pretty much checked out of the picture for most of his life. And then the 2 middle daughters are from my second marriage. And then Elliot, our youngest, is our kind of unifying baby, the 2 of ours, Claire and I, and she kind of brings the family together in a way, So it's.
What's your wife do?
Well, she's my chief operating officer at this point, and she also manages some Airbnb stuff for her folks. And prior to that, she was an entrepreneur herself. She ran a cleaning business for 14 years. And I saw that. And by the way, tell her I love her LinkedIn picture. It's so awesome.
A little LinkedIn.
I love it too. I took that picture. I had made that picture. Yeah, no, that's great. I love it. I mean, that's exactly the kind of attitude that she's got, and
Is it? Okay.
she's
All
a
right.
fiery no shit person, and just stronger than anybody I know, and to a
She
fault
has
at
to be.
times.
She
Yeah.
has to be fiery and strong, because when she met you, you're like,
Yeah.
I own 2 or 3 businesses. I've been married twice. I got kids. And she's like, what the hell?
What a train wreck this guy is, right? Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Okay. How long have you been married, you guys?
5 years.
5 years. Okay. All right.
We've
Very
been
good.
together just over 8, almost 9 years now. Been together.
All right. Very good. Walk us through your career. So you don't have to give us all the details. I know IBM, it was a major part of your background, but kind of walk us through the career progression, and just tell us a little bit about your professional career before you started LucidCoast. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's important to take that one all the way back to my dad was a carpenter. Okay. And maybe even before then, right? Because even as a kid, like a young kid, and everybody does the lemonade stand or whatever. Maybe not everybody, but I feel like almost everybody at some point does a lemonade stand, right? But I was doing lemonade stands and car washes and producing circuses in my backyard, and not because of necessarily of the money, but because of this interesting drive to create, and to engage and to do, I think. So I think I point that out only because I think that what I've come to realize is that I have been an entrepreneur all of my life, but didn't really have the awareness of that, or the language for that, or the encouragement for that, or any real examples in my life until much later in my life. But I had that nugget, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't say any little nugget, it's not quite fair to say any examples, but reasonable examples that I felt inspired and like, that's what I want to do. Right.
Yeah.
And that's important to my story, because it not having those examples, not knowing what was possible, was fundamental to my buying into, the narratives that I bought into throughout my life, and instead of creating my own. And I think a lot of us do that. We choose our path based on known potential paths, right?
Right. Yes.
And before the internet, you didn't have those examples. So, so anyway, my dad was, of course, an entrepreneur, and I worked for him. A lot of my entrepreneurial experience comes from my dad. I think it was really his method of saving money on childcare, because when I would spend time with my dad in the summers, I had a lot of jobs, right? Everything from picking strawberries. I was a weed picker on a strawberry farm when I was like 10, and my dad made me ride my bike to the strawberry patch and back instead of getting a ride. And, he would forever be lining me up to mow somebody's lawn or paint somebody's shed or dig a ditch. And then when I got old enough to be meaningfully, usable around the job site, then of course I was a gopher in the construction sense. And then I was taught to swing a hammer. And then I eventually was, adept at carpentry, at least framing carpentry.
Okay.
So I did some of that, to support myself in the summers and make a little money as a teenager. And then later in life, I leaned back on that a couple times just to get by.
Okay.
And so I had that as background. And of course I worked at shoe stores and pizza shops and Hardee's and, Big Boy. And so I have a lot of career basis from the time I was 10, that I count as part of where I am today. Because
sure, absolutely. Yeah, definitely shaped you in many ways. Yep.
It shaped me. It formed something that I don't see sometimes in others, especially when I look at hiring and developing employees over my career. I can see a marked difference between generations or cultures that had to struggle to get there versus absolutely not, right?
It really is. And by the way, we could pause right there and do a whole episode on what you just said.
100%. We could probably do a year-long series on that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had this. I dropped out of high school in my junior year because I had gotten to the point by then that I was not seeing the point, and a lot of kids don't, right? But I was really not seeing the point of this structure that I was being pushed.
What year
through.
was that? Junior year. What year was that?
Junior year was, what was it? It was probably 1989. Oh, no, 1990. It was
Okay.
1989 or 90.
All right.
And I, what precipitated that was I had actually, my mom had helped me out. She knew I was having all these struggles with school. She connected me with an educational consultant. I don't even know what his real title was, but he worked with like the intermediate school districts, and he helped, come up with alternative education pathways. And so I worked with this guy and put together a proposal. It was a 27-page proposal that wasn't just paper. It was actually arrangements with, Bart Stupak, who was then our congressman, an internship with Bart Stupak for a political science credit. And the job that I was doing at a shoe store, Endicott Johnson, my manager had signed on to a course of things. He was going to teach me about business management and specifically do things that were going to be it was an apprenticeship basically. And then I was going to say, hey, I'll meet my state requirements by taking these tests, and I'll test out in these modules. And I was, I had to present that whole thing to the school board, and was soundly rejected because, of course, back in the 80s, you couldn't set a precedent like that. Hey, we got to make sure everybody goes through the same thing and gets that. So I, devastated by that, the consultant I was working with said, well, drop out and do it anyway. And I'm like, well, what? He said, drop out. You're miserable, right? And I go, yeah, you put this thing together, right? Yeah, I'll do it anyway. And so I did. I walked in the next day, dropped out of high school, and I took my GED a year later. And then I went off to a community college as a first step to going to college. And then let's just say I was smart and I was motivated, but maybe I wasn't mature enough for college yet, because I wound up diving pretty heavily into the more social aspects of collegiate life, which unfortunately wound up resulting in my earliest venture capital backers backing out of our deal, in the sense that my folks and my family said, you're going to have to pay for college yourself now. So because I did, I did a semester, a really good semester, but then I at a community college, but then I went to university and I kind of partied it up and blew it. And anyway, that drove me to the military, because at that time we were in the midst of, right in between Gulf War I and II. And there was a lot of patriotism floating around, and I was a teenage male, and I was susceptible to that, and I needed a job and I needed a future, and I didn't know what the hell I was going to do. And that was very counter to me as a person, but timing is everything, and they got me.
And you joined the Army.
I joined the Army. And
now let me pause you right there. Based on everything you've told me about you so far, not wanting to follow rules, do things differently, not seeing these processes, all this stuff, like, it's bullshit. And then you join the Army, which is like the most structured organization on the planet.
Here's where the importance of narratives and marketing come in, right? Because I was, if even you think about this, the narrative of public school is, if you go there and do your stuff and get good grades, and you get into a good college, and then you'll get a good career. And then that narrative has proven to be a whole lot of bullshit in the latest economy, right? It really has. It's an outdated knowledge. It's an outdated construct, but it's a narrative that's very powerful in our culture. At the time, the narrative that was very powerful in our culture was patriotism, was Gulf War, was, hey, we've got, it was all around me, and also free college, pay for school, get a skill. And so it was a narrative and a marketing that hooked me. And I was 18, what in the hell did I know about myself? I didn't realize the things I'm sharing with you about myself now, I had no clue of back then. Right.
Yeah, understood.
But the good news was that experience reaffirmed for me that I don't follow rules well, and I'm not supposed to be in a highly structured environment, and I'm a creative visionary and a risk taker, and even in the military.
You made it almost 4 years, but I noticed you got out just a tad early. What did you do? Did you go in and say, look, I want out early, or what happened?
I did. I went in and I said I want out early, and my commander said, that's funny. No. And so I said, well, you know what, there's got to be, there's a way, right? Every process has an exception. And so I committed to figuring out what the exception was. And as it happened, I had been going to University of Maryland, taking psychology courses. They have campuses all over at military bases, extension courses.
I see.
And that had me in the library on the military base that I was on, which had me oftentimes perusing regulations that I didn't know existed. But it gave me the tools to go and research, like there must be a way, right? And I found that there was in fact a clause and a program in the military that allowed for a commanding officer to let a soldier leave, transition up to 6 months early for the purposes of going back to school.
Okay. All right.
So I thought, great, I got him now. I printed out the regulation. I went into my commanding officer's office and I handed it to him. I said, "Sir, I'd like you to reconsider." And he looked at it. He said, "No." And I was like, all right. So I wrote my congressman. And I wrote my congressman with letters of reference from a bunch of former employers and from people in my sphere and from some of the commanding officers I'd worked with. And I put together a whole package and I explained it in a letter, everything that was happening. And I put my acceptance to Northern Michigan University in there and I sent it all, not knowing that when a serviceman sends a letter to his congressman, his or her congressman, it automatically triggers a congressional investigation.
Oh.
So I was called.
Okay, that's an interesting tip.
I didn't know it either, but with a complaint, right? And so I was called very quickly back to the commanding officers, within a couple of weeks, and I met a very different, very red-faced captain at that point, who was pretty frustrated with me, but now I couldn't do anything. He was like, he had to sign the papers. It was being forced. He was pissed off. He let me know it, but he had to sign me out and honorable discharge, and it was time for me to go.
Did you? But you were in long enough to get school paid for, though. You still got the GI Bill.
Still invest. Yeah, I got my benefits, and I got my VA benefits, and I did my time. I served,
Great.
and I followed regulations to. It's not that I don't know how to leverage rules; it's I don't like them.
All right. So you get out, and you go to Northern Michigan University, or then what happens?
Yeah, I came back to NMU, and at the time, I didn't still really know what I wanted to do with my life. I had been taking a lot of psych courses, and previously in life, I'd been involved in a lot of theater, and that had been a dream of mine. But I saw a lot of my friends going into theater and not making any money, and so I was thinking, well, yeah, but I need to have a career. I've got to be responsible again with the narrative, right? The narrative of our country and of our Western society was, well, you got to make money and you have to have status. And I didn't consciously think those things. I just felt it inside. Oh, I'm worried. I need something that's going to get me a job. And so I picked business because I figured going into business, there was always something you could do. And then this thing called the World Wide Web was happening.
Right.
And it intrigued me because I'd played with tech a little bit when I was young. I had some early exposure to C and to, some basic programming on old Commodore consoles, whatever my school could afford back then.
Yeah.
But I never really understood or had access to that sort of technology until I was just about ready to transition from the military. And I had been thinking about staying in the military and taking an information technology path with my communications background. But that's when I decided, no, I'm going to go back to school. And so I picked a double course of education, which was really business and computer information systems.
Okay.
And it turned out to be a pretty good basis for me because I was naturally pretty inclined toward business skills and naturally curious about systems and technology. And I was really fascinated by the way in which technology was connecting people.
Okay.
And that was what reeled in my interest the most and what got me into networking to start with. My career at IBM began when I happened across a fortunate turn of events and was recruited by an IBMer. And it was actually, at the time, I was recruited by IBM and Accenture. And Accenture was it called Accenture back then? It was called Anderson still back then, Anderson Consulting.
Okay.
So and I remember at my IBM interview, they asked me, I talked to a lot of different individuals, but one of the guys was a networking practice manager. And that was what really drew me to networking. Was the network was the core of how technology was going to unite people and expose people to different worldviews and bring people together in different new ways that I could just sense was going to be something big. And I don't know why I sensed that. I don't know why at that age I wasn't thinking about it in the terms I am today. I wasn't thinking about it in economic or social impact or values or even global socioeconomic parameters. It was just this sense inside that something important about connecting people, and the network being the mechanism for that was what drew me into that. And anyway, long story short, that's when I started my IBM career.
Yeah, and then you spent many years, a couple of different stints there too, maybe, right? I think.
Yeah. So I might hold the record of most number of times quitting IBM and coming back to IBM because I had resigned from IBM at one point on the back of an experience that left me kind of jaded. I was several years into my career. I had been in a position where my entrepreneurial nature and my looking at systems and seeing them broken and wanting to fix them nature had resulted in my getting a position that was a national leadership position. And I invested a lot of time and effort that year and was given assurances that, if certain things happened, then certain investments were going to come and that, the practice vision was going to unfold. And I did a great job that year. And unfortunately, it didn't end the way that I had anticipated. And that was because, you did a great job, but other parts of the business didn't. So we can't invest after all. And oh, by the way, here's a set of golf balls for this year's bonus, even though you hit 139% of your objectives. And that was my first resignation, because I had put so much into this notion and done everything that they said and done it not only well, but better than expected. And then was given the old, better luck next time, champ. So as it happened when I resigned, I also had a job offer from a different company in my back pocket. You always want to have some option ready to go. And I went over to a different company. It was a division of France Telecom called Equant back then. And now it's FT Orange or Orange Business Services. I don't know what they are these days, but a group of folks that I knew and were connected to had gone over to help that organization start its North American consulting business. And I took a position in leading the establishment and the first big win of their outsourcing, their North American outsourcing organization.
They were a smaller group then. How many employees at the time?
In North America, we probably had like 200 people at that time.
Okay.
Overall, it was a much smaller business, like a $4 billion business versus a $100 billion business, right?
Yes.
So tremendously different than IBM, but also a lot of autonomy, a lot of entrepreneurial thinking in the North American component, because it was new and it was expected to be a growth division. So there was investment being made. Mm-hmm. And in that, I spent a year and a half there, helped them get that first deal landed. It was a $60 million outsourcing deal with an entertainment company. Learned a lot about.
Can I pause you right there?
Yeah.
Is that so? Is one of your biggest strengths at that time the ability to the people skills, the networking, the conversations, the biz dev? Let me build a relationship. Let me sell you a product. I mean, is that one of your top strengths right there at that time?
I would categorize it more in the realm of solution visioning and clarification. Like I went from networking. If I back up in my career, I went from networking into systems management within the first 5 years of my career. And primarily that was because although I was interested in the network and fascinated by its impact, I found that I didn't really get excited about going deeper and deeper and deeper into packet tracing, right? And the fundamental depth of the technology I could get it, and I did like it, but it didn't light me up as much as in my network days. I would go in and do networking assessments. I would troubleshoot. I would do traffic monitoring. I would look at the architecture. I would, categorize a number of challenges that an organization was having, and then inspect the network to find out how the network was impacting those issues. And in most of those engagements, it wasn't the network. We would tweak one or two things, but I found really quickly that things like, hey, your application development folks built a distributed application on a network that's still using green screens, and it's not behaving properly, right? Because they didn't think about the architect. It was the architecture of the application, or it was the expectation of the business that got mistranslated into an RFP that had nothing to do with what the business was trying to do, or it was change management. Somebody moved something. And so I found that I was much more adept at seeing how the symptom that they were experiencing traced back to the root, whether it was in the process domain, the organizational domain, the tools domain.
I see.
And I really liked that. So I became a systems management consultant, and later systems architect and leader. And that put me in a position where I was always going in and out of organizations. For a long time, what I did was, 8 to 12 week engagements that were assessment strategy deals. And I would go in and diagnose, like a general practitioner or something. You'd go in and diagnose an organization with an IT lens, but always you have to connect that to what is IT doing or not doing for the business. And so I was going into very large financial institutions, manufacturing organizations, lots of a little bit of retail, a lot of healthcare.
Okay.
And then at some point, sometimes it would be smaller businesses as well, like little regional, counties. And I worked at the Louisiana Department of Revenue one year. So a lot of different types of clients, from SMB to mega global enterprise level. And finding that across all of those, I saw patterns, and I saw patterns of broken systems or of misaligned systems. And that started then heading me down the direction of, my tendency to do that was very potent in that realm, because I was the guy that was talented at sitting between the salesperson and the customer, and figuring out how to say, look, I know you want to sell your stuff, guy, but what we're really doing here is we're trying to solve a problem. You're not hearing the problem. Let me help you understand what we really need to sell them. I'm not trying to, and so it was an interesting role and an exciting one, because I could always find new places to do, 8 to 12 weeks. I go in and help diagnose, to build a plan, build a roadmap, create a team, rally the team, get them all gelled around a vision. And then, okay, you guys go and execute, maybe bring in some partners to do the rest of the work. And then I'm off to the next deal.
Love it. Now, love it. You're building your career, you're building your strengths, but at some point, that little entrepreneurial bug is down there in your gut, and you're like, man, I could take the same service and do it on my own and probably make more money than, instead of making IBM rich.
Right. Well, and it was almost, and it was never about, that's the funny thing for me. It really has never been about the money. Okay. I have this weird, it's a flaw, it's to a flaw, right? And so I have to make sure that in my business, I've got somebody who cares about making money very, very rigorously, to kind of, offset my tendency to just believe, if we do the right things, and if we follow our vision and we build the right culture, the money will come. And
that is
that's
true,
always
true to a certain extent, but
yeah, absolutely. You have to have pragmatic lenses, and you can't just always, I realize that as a default setting. And so I have to look and go, where are my blind spots? And I look to my team for that.
Love it.
Yeah. So I think more so than I could make money doing this, what my experience of entrepreneurship at IBM continued to put me on was this cycle of seeing opportunities and creating a solution or a pathway to leverage those opportunities in sales deals, led to a bigger role where I started doing that for a practice, and then for an entire geography when I moved to New Zealand. And I was a growth markets effectively a director, although he never gave me the title. I replaced a director, but I got a band 10, which is just below. But what I did then was I stepped out of my norm. I had been comfortable in those practice leadership jobs, but now here came a whole multi-country, multi-geography, 37 countries and cultures opportunity to lead a services organization. And that was super humbling, because now I had to run a business and do what I had been doing all my career, but I had to do it with dozens of different country management that I couldn't make them do anything, right? I held P&L for my global GM for that whole growth market, but there were 6 or 7 others of me that held P&L for different service lines that were trying to vie for the attention of the sales teams and the country managers and the in-country teams who actually did, execute it. And so it became a scaling thing, right? How do you scale the skills that I had learned across not only countries, but oftentimes countries who are culturally at odds with
Yes.
you individually, culturally at odds with one another, and who don't, at the end of the day, have to listen to you. There's nothing that you have over them. And so it was about culture, not culture change. It was about culture symbiosis, learning how to be symbiotic with amid cultural differences and find the shared spaces of value to team, to build consensus. And that was what I had been really good at doing. Because when I was going into those organizations, and even today, right, I go into any of my clients at an enterprise level, and the problems are almost always the same. They manifest themselves differently, but they're almost always the same. And a lot of times it really comes down to inadequate attention paid to the importance of culture and buy-in and consensus and vision and communication. The human element.
It always comes into play, right? I mean, I love technology as well, and I appreciate all of it, but at the end of the day, and until robots are talking to robots and robots are doing the work and we're doing, until that happens, there's always a human element in there somewhere that somebody like you has got to connect the dots with.
That's right. And honestly, until we're all, in those pods from the Matrix, and
right, exactly,
there's always going to be a human element.
Yes.
So that all got me, all of that was really important to my ultimately realizing I was an entrepreneur and I could do it myself. But even then, it was never with the intent to build another IBM or another IT services company. It really wasn't. Okay. It was a different path that I was on. And I was, when I came back to the United States, I was doing a global role, and for almost 10 years here, I ran a global organization, 2 different global teams within IBM from Marquette, Michigan, and I was doing it largely from home. But what I recognized, because now I came back to Marquette and I was a father and I had 2 little children, and they were getting ready to go to school. One was in school, one was in preschool. And although the buildings had changed and there were, more accoutrement here in Marquette, and there was a little more culture, what had really happened is that we'd gone from an iron town and a industry town, on a port town, to a playground town. Come visit us, be like us. We got, come here, bring people here so that they can support our region with their tourist dollars. And whether that was outdoor rec or, building, cannabis stores on every corner, or bars on every corner, or coffee shops, restaurants, we became a destination economy.
Okay.
And now I'm looking at my kids and thinking, well, what are their opportunities to stay here if they wanted? If they wanted to be in this region, it's a beautiful place. I mean, I've been all over the world, and I'll tell you, in terms of place, this is one of the best there is. There's just so much converging right here in terms of quality of life for me, right? it's a wonderful place to build a life. But if my kids wanted to, how would they do that? And what would be the opportunities? And if, they could be, one of my kids is very artistic, and she loves to paint and draw and sing and play music. So in that regard, lots of opportunities here, because there's a lot of local music. There's art is very part of our culture. However, the dynamics of our U.S. economy and of our approach to economic development in this town specifically have now manifested in a point where many of the people who do those things can't live here anymore. You just can't afford it. You can't possibly be, but now you still have to, they need to be here because the tourism industry depends on them. But where do they live? And then, so now they're starting to live dozens of miles out of town. So anyway, all of that is important, because as I was looking at my friends who were part of that community, the artists and the musicians and the actors, and I was witnessing their struggle, and realizing that there is so many more ways for us to develop an economy in rural America than trying to invite people or big companies to come set up shop and develop opportunity. That network gives everybody the opportunity to create value in the world. That you don't have to be, I'll tell you what, the world doesn't need any more billionaires. In fact, if I'm a billionaire, I want you to come and personally accuse me of failure and call me to task, because if I'm ever a billionaire, I have failed. I have failed as a human being, and I believe every billionaire out there, frankly, has fundamentally failed as a human being, because that's just not what it's about.
It really isn't. It really isn't, isn't it? We can pause right there for just a second. I had a guest on the podcast recently that I'm not going to quote him exactly, but he said something to the effect of, how can I drive around and see massive poverty in certain neighborhoods? How can there be places in the world where children don't have fresh water, but we have billionaires building rocket ships just so they can ride them into space and be cool?
Yeah, right. Right. And I mean, look, I guess on the one hand, we can all look at that, and that's what capitalism as we've built it depends on. A small part of us, all of us, looks at that and goes, wow, cool.
Yeah.
And I admit it, even me, I look at that and I'm like, wow, going to space, wouldn't that be cool? But if we think about the cost of that, and if we think about the opportunity cost of that, as opposed to what could be done, and you mentioned kids, one of the formative experiences for me that I share with my kids over and over again was going to India for the first time when I was in that position. And I was picked up at the airport. Now, I wasn't a very high executive. I was, band 10 in IBM parlance, which isn't even in the executive ranks yet. So I wasn't an important person, but the Indian culture is such that I was a geography leader. And so there was a certain respect there. And one of my employees had arranged for my car driver to pick me up at the airport. And I get there, and it was, let's just say it was a little over the top, right? I'm a kid from Marquette, Michigan, grew up, the child of a single mom educator. And I walk off out of the plane, and there's this guy there. All the other people are there with hand scrawled signs, but there's one guy with a brass pole, has a wooden plaque, and it's got Mr. Glendon on it. And I'm like, oh, good Lord, what is happening? And it was really sort of like this weird feeling. It was kind of cool, but also kind of like, because everywhere, this super crowded airport, and it's only one person like that. And we walk out, and out of nowhere comes an assistant to this guy who grabs my luggage, and we walk to this very nice car, not your typical rental car that you'll get in India, but a really nice black town car kind of thing. And I'm going, this is interesting. So I get in, and we're driving to the hotel that I was going to stay at. And on the way there, we're driving past the edge of the slums. And I looked out, and there's a lot of traffic. You stop, go, there's honking everywhere, chaos and noise, because that's how India is. And I looked out the window, and there were three little girls that must have been triplets, because they were equally sized. They looked alike, by the side of the road in front of this little tent that was made out of trash where there was what I took to be their mother cooking something over some little pot trash fire. But those little girls were dancing around and smiling
Isn't that
and
amazing?
waving.
Isn't that's crazy? Wow.
And I thought, man, here I am, like, I grew up in Marquette, Michigan, child of a blah, blah, blah. I got my little story, right? And I'm feeling like, wow, I've really made it, because here I am in this town car, and wow, I never would have anticipated that. But look, and at that point in my career, I was already, I'm like, that moment, my first daughter was born, and she was back home in New Zealand. And it just was, my heart sunk, because I'm like, I haven't made it anywhere. Where have I made it? Where have I made it? I've made it to the point where I can now see the price of overvaluing money. I've made it to the point where I could, yeah. So I don't know how I got on that jag, Steve. I'm sorry. You're gonna have to.
It's okay. I
drag,
think it's a great.
Drag me back, but
I think it's a great topic. Let's wrap up that topic with this. Here's how I like to say it to people that I know. Just because you have a conscience and you feel, you have an emotional feeling for people that are in poverty like that, that doesn't mean you're a socialist. It just means you look at the situation and go, this doesn't feel right. Like there's got to be a better balance than what we have, right? And so that's exactly how I feel. I mean, I'm a capitalist. I probably wouldn't vote to be a socialist country. However, I do have those same emotional feelings. And I told that story recently when I was in Naples, Florida. And there's many places like this in the country, but Naples, I mean, damn, if you're right next to the water, it's all billionaires, and you do not have to drive very far east from Naples. I mean, less than 10 miles, and you see poverty, and I've driven that stretch where I had the exact same feeling. I'm like, man, doesn't feel right. Like this doesn't feel right.
You can throw a rock from the giant complex, the Scientology complex in Clearwater, to some absolute slums, right? And there's these mansions there. So absolutely, and you're hitting on the core of it here. I clearly, here I am in a co-working space. I started a company. I'm obviously a capitalist,
right?
In the sense that I'm pursuing that end,
right?
Socialism has a lot of different connotations. But when I lived in New Zealand, we had 2 children, and it cost nothing, $0, including 6 months of prenatal care in home, 6 months of postnatal care in home, 4 weeks of paternity leave. It cost us nothing, and I got time off to bond with my kids, not because of socialism, but because they recognize that any country's children are a valuable, perhaps the most valuable resource that they've got. And time with parents and children is important to a fundamentally well-ordered society. And so they want to support that. And we're paying taxes anyway. So some of that goes over here. Okay, so look, if you want to define that as socialism, then the United States of America is just as socialist as any, but our beneficiaries of socialism are corporations, non-people. So, to me, Steve, it's not even about, whenever you say ist or ism, what you're really talking about is classism. And if you're a socialist, that's a class of people. A capitalist is a class it's an ideology, right? And what I love the most about entrepreneurship, that spirit and technology, is that technology and the spirit of entrepreneurship together have the power to finally help transcend classism.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's not working yet, right? We're in this real chaotic phase where it's confusing us all as human beings. But part of what I'm trying to do with my company is figure out how do you build a company that actually pioneers a new way of being a company that isn't about the isms, and it's not about classism.
Can I ask you, how do we do that? How do we eliminate the classism without forcing humans into a specific narrative that somebody higher up is driving, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the answer, but what I do have is an active experiment. I have an active experiment, and that's my company. That's what I'm.
Let's talk
what
about it, by the way, lucidcoast.com, right? And you started it. So I want to make sure I get this out there for the listeners, because I know we're edging up on our time here. So it's lucidcoast.com. And by the way,
Yeah.
Keith Glendon, of course, also on LinkedIn, where you can connect with him there. Give us the Lucid Coast elevator pitch. Go for it.
Well, I'm going to give you the Lucid Coast corporate elevator pitch first,
Okay.
and then I'll give you the philosophical, because this
Okay.
this has been a challenge for me. If you go to our website today, what you're going to find is a very clean, very simple, very straight to the point,
I saw
pragmatic. This is what we do. And
Yep.
and if I were to tell you my elevator pitch, we're a technology innovation company that focuses on supporting utilities and critical infrastructure around IT service management, enterprise asset management, and cybersecurity in Michigan. That's it. Now, I've come to that story brand because telling the story of the purpose of Lucid Coast is really about talking about the Lucid Coast way. And that's really what we're doing. The instantiation of being an IT services company will continue to be a part of the company.
Okay.
But it's not the company, right? The company is really a mechanism through which I want to try and experiment with how do we build systems that are less classist? How do we build systems, starting with our companies, with the kinds of companies we build? Because, I've talked to people everywhere from, the backwaters of Louisiana to Pakistan, to Palestine, to China, to right here in my own hometown. And no matter what color, creed, religion, sexual orientation they were, at the fundamental basis of it all, they wanted the same things in life, the fundamentally same things. And I think corporations are a big part of what screws up the dynamic between people sharing those values and creating together along those values. Certainly classism doesn't stop with the corporation, but when we look at what we've done with corporations and how we've anonymized the impact to your neighbor and to the people in another country and to the climate and everything else, we've made it very convenient for all of us to go, well, not my fault, I'm not doing it. I'm a good person, even though I hold stock in 20 destructive companies. So thus was born, I didn't set out to build a company. I set out to build opportunities for people who were not being given opportunities. Why? Okay. I grew up here, and I got lucky and found, I got a combination of lucky and risky, I guess, but I was able to connect with a really cool opportunity. A lot of people in rural America are experiencing the fact that we've been experiencing decline in GDP for the last 15 years. That decline in GDP on a national level almost identically matches the decline of new business starts in America. And even with the uptick of all the entrepreneurship that we see, what that entrepreneurship, that brand of entrepreneurship has been focused on highly scalable, very, very growth oriented, and in centers of opportunity like Silicon Valley and Boston and Austin and, centers, right? And that has left traditionally entrepreneurship, I guess, in European colonial America, traditionally it was built from entrepreneurship that came about from all over the place. Wherever people were, there became opportunity, and they created, opportunity to generate GDP and to generate opportunity for the next generation. But we don't see that as much. We see, centralization or consolidation with the aim of hyper growth, with the aim of becoming what? Amazon and Jeff Bezos. And I don't need to take pot shots at Jeff Bezos. There's enough people that are going to do that. But I don't oppose the fact that somebody can amass that kind of money, I guess. But it's, what do you do then? Now what?
Yeah. Now what?
Anyway, back to Lucid Coast, right? So.
Yeah. How many?
Before I started, I need to get before I got to the point of saying I'm going to start a business. what I was really doing was trying to create channels to opportunity. And the first thing I did is I looked around my community, I looked at schools, I looked at what I had learned about the internet, and realized that, part of the thing was there wasn't enough technology education. Kids didn't realize they weren't learning how to use devices. They were learning how to be used by devices. And by and large, that's happening all over the country, right?
That's happening right now.
every day. And our country, I'll tell you, absolutely hands down, our country is the worst. In other countries, there are children being driven to understand, how does technology work and why would you use technology and how should it serve humanity? Not here's a device to just make you buy more stuff. So I started on a crusade that was really about education, coding clubs, getting involved with the school board.
I see.
In fact, ironically, I sat at the same school board, in the same room, in the same chair, at the same table that I was at when I was a kid, trying to pitch my idea. But now I was a board member trying to pitch transformational education.
That's pretty
ideas. Good. And guess what? I resigned from the school board 4 years later, because unfortunately, a lot of our systems are such that the inertia keeps them the way they are. They're hanging on, right? And while I was going through that period, I also became involved with an entrepreneur who became a very good friend and a mentor of mine. His name is Jeff Nyquist. He founded a company called Neurotrainer. He's now 6 years on. They're doing quite well, but it was a brain training company. But early on, I got involved with him and had the good fortune to go through an I-Corps, an NSF grant application I-Corps project program that taught me the basics of the business plan canvas and the Steve Blank methodology, and like all the, how do you start a company in the current context of entrepreneurship, which then opened a whole new door to me and consideration of, oh, well, there's some different ways we might start to create opportunity here. And it's entrepreneurship. It's not just about technology. We have to have the technology education and the entrepreneurship education exposure to get people going. And that got me involved with a lot of economic development organizations, with a lot of state organizations.
Okay.
I mistakenly I misunderstood some of the systems. Sometimes that's a thing, you misinterpret what systems are really supposed to do. And so I maybe wasted a little bit of time, but I didn't really waste it. I spent a couple of years. I spent a couple of years getting a real good education in economic development and politics. And that led me around to finally deciding that what I really needed to do was actually do the thing I was trying to do, create opportunities here at the local level in a different sort of way, building a different kind of company. And so that process led me ultimately to going, all right, I need to simplify my business model, focus on what we're going to do to make revenue in just tangible capitalist terms, and not tell everybody too much about what we're really doing as a company and how the ecosystem of our company, which I think about it as a platform company, an opportunity platform company, and with a purpose of healing. And that's a really strange thing to say as a corporate entity, but I think that the world needs healing, both emotionally, spiritually, physically, ecologically, and from an equity standpoint.
You are a lot deeper as a human being than your company website portrays. Is that by design? Are you purposely doing it that way? And why not go deeper with things on your website? Because everything you're saying is I don't see that reflected on the website.
Yeah. Well, and that is by design. And if you would have looked at my website a year ago, you would have said, and this was the most common question anyone would ask, what is LucidCoast? Even my employees, what is LucidCoast? And what I have come to is this understanding that the story I'm trying to tell is still being written.
Okay.
And I'm still experimenting.
Fair enough.
And in the meantime, I have to have a target market. I have to have
I see.
marketing that speaks to the market that's going to sustain me. So what we've done in our platform company is we bring in our revenue by working with enterprise customers who have a need that is in line with our values. So that's why we focus on utilities, because we think that the transformation of the utility industry is one of the most important things to support. It's an existential thing. We've got to transform our use and efficiency of energy. So I feel good as a person, and it feels in line with values to focus on that industry. And likewise, cybersecurity, safety of people, safety of critical infrastructure. So that's a place that I can start making money that is in line with my values, that can then pull in enough revenue to turn around. And the other part of our business is investing, and not investing in the traditional sense, because when I say invest, a lot of times that means invest my personal time, invest my employees' time, give money away, invest energy and effort and collaboration in a way that's not going to bring me any financial return ever. Because I understand that what I'm doing here isn't about my lifetime. It's about what it's going to come from, what's going to come from this lifetime. The legacy that we build, the waves we put out in the world last beyond our existence. And so should be the case with well, it is the case with corporations, right? You look at an IBM, they've been around 110 years now. They have influenced, both good and bad, a hell of a lot of things in this world, and they will continue to do so. And if you build a system or a company that's driven by metrics and goals and objectives that are about simply making money, you will invariably leave more harm than good, as a person, as an entity, as a corporation.
Agreed.
So it becomes a big, long philosophical thing. And I was trying to figure out how to represent that. So from a branding perspective, where we are, that was phase one of simplify it. I had intended in Q1 to get an update, but we have to also manage costs and resources and time. And so right now that's our placeholder, but in development is additions to our website that really tell us.
Well, the reason I
round out our
sorry, the reason I asked the question is because the values that you speak of, the vision, the bigger goal that you have around why the company exists and what you're doing, I think that's a great, very cool story that I would like to see on the website in some way, whether it's video or a little more content, because I think that would make me as a consumer, that would make me be like, oh, okay, this is cool. I want to use these guys. Out of all the people I can call, I want to call Keith because I like, their mission, their value, what is their cause and all that. I think and I think millennials love that, of course. And so
you're absolutely right. And when you said that just, maybe I should get some millennial branding people to work and help, because you know what, I started out that way. I started going down that path of saying, like, look, I'm building culture and purpose first. I funded my company. I said, we're going to build a company that is and does these things. But what I found very quickly was it's scary to start talking about something new. And when you start talking about something that's not only new, but will disrupt systems or cause people to question their value structure, that doesn't endear you to potential customers or partners.
That is true. And we all have to, and hey, Riderflex, I hear you. We're my day job. We're a recruiting firm, right? I mean, the podcast is great, but how we make money is we're a recruiting firm. And I also, as the CEO of Riderflex, I have to be careful because, I don't want to piss off large groups of people in any way.
That's right.
Clients.
That's right. That's right. It is. That's a really difficult thing in the information
era.
Tough thing we're finding that's why this kind of thing is so important. I mean, I really appreciate what you're doing and what every podcaster is doing, because having long form conversations, having these complex issues talked about in a setting that actually allows people to consider them instead of just arguing about them is real important.
I could ask you 50 more questions. I'd love to have you back on the show because I think we could go deeper, especially on some social issues and topics that I feel, or at least I think that you feel very strongly about that we haven't had a chance to go into. By the way, have you ever thought about running for office or getting into politics? Because I feel like you could do well there.
I thought about it. I thought about it. My school board experience and my knowledge and insight from friends who are at state level government has definitely hardened my resolve to never do that. I really think I think that private sector, if we could build companies that behaved more like nonprofits and nonprofits that behave more like companies, then private sector would have a lot to offer. And in fact, one of the things I'm really passionate about is the intersection of community, private sector, and education. Education, K-12 education and collegiate education in this country has got to transform. It's built for when I was in kindergarten, it was built for a bygone era. And now it's definitely built for a bygone era. And yet we all kind of realize that, but nobody wants to solve that problem. Nobody wants to pay for it. So how can we solve it? We can solve it through public-private partnerships and innovative new ways of transforming skills while transforming education, while transforming the brokenness in industry. And if we could figure out how to harness the power of those, I think about it as mycelial symbiotic capitalism, right? It's collective community capitalism. We're not going to throw capitalism out the door. There is a very powerful effect to capitalism. If we've got to look at isms, but what if there was something that was more like the mycelial network in the forest, and you've got mushroom fungi that are organically and through natural processes connecting with the resources that they need, but not in a parasitic way, right? They're symbiotic. They're taking the nutrients from the decaying tree leaves, feeds the fungi, and the fungi then create additional fertility in the soil, and it's an ecosystem that naturally organizes itself. It's not one that is organized through command and control. It's one that is organized through an expression of purpose, and that purpose interacting with other aligned purposes, right? And that's kind of the closest thing I can get to describing what I'm playing with from an economic standpoint. And from a company standpoint, it's really about, hey, what do we value? Well, first and foremost, if our company isn't serving our people, then we're not doing it right. And if we're not then also serving clients and serving to solve problems, and we're competing, but we're not competing against each other, we're competing against problems. So that's kind of the value set that I've expressed it in a few different ways. And if you look at my link, or LucidCoast LinkedIn, there's kind of the beginning of the definition of the LucidCoast way, and it's taken shape. But it's a journey. Because this is something that is new. It's not even a B Corp what I'm talking about here, because B Corps are something different.
By the way, for the listeners,
stay tuned.
and speaking of that, for the listeners, lucidcoast.com. You can also email them, info@lucidcoast.com. Phone number 906-767-0095, or connect with Keith on LinkedIn as well. Keith, thank you so much for being on the Riderflex podcast and sharing your story. I could go for another hour, but I really appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I appreciate it as well. And yeah, anytime. I enjoy talking about this stuff, because whenever I talk about it with another human being, right, there's always something that comes from that in terms of my clarification of how am I going to tell this story, and what is it that I'm even trying to do, right? Because when you're trying to find product market fit for a broad ecosystem vision, man, that's tough.
It is.
It's yeah. So
you're headed in the right direction. I love what you're doing, man. Congrats on where you're at so far.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You have a great